Man, we live, baby. We live. We lit, baby. We lit. Jeez, 2022, baby. Listen, I'm gonna have to welcome you guys to an edition of Talk with the Titans. We have a phenomenal Titan here for you today. He goes by the name of Thomas Alexander, and he has got a presentation that is gonna blow your minds, right? But before we do that, before we go on and we jump into this show, I need you guys to do me one thing. You know what it is already. Before we even get started, just hit up the like button. Hit the like button because you already know what it's gonna be. Yeah, it's gonna be fire. And of course, before we even start off, let me just let you know the format of today's show. We're gonna do a presentation. Okay, in that presentation, we're going to take super chats. With your super chats, drop your questions or your comments, and I'll do my best to make sure they're answered, you know, in a good spot throughout the presentation. Otherwise, we will have a session at the end where all your questions will be asked and answered, as well as where we will be sharing the link to the show. Okay, the link where you can come on backstage and you can actually talk to Thomas Alexander himself on this particular topic. Okay, all right. So I'm glad we know what we're doing here. I'm actually gonna, bring forth the man of the hour right now, Thomas Alexander. Peace to you, King. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here. And I'm excited to share my presentation today.
Awesome, awesome. Listen, family tree, I'm telling you now, yeah, if you haven't already, hit the like button and share this with a friend, okay? This is going to be one of the best shows you've seen on Titans TV for a long time. We're going back to it, back to Talk with the Titans days, the home of conscious information, yeah? Where all the intellectual giants come to just sit down and have some tea and really kick it with us. Thomas Alexander is actually coming all the way from Germany. Usually we have Americans, people only here from the UK. I think today this is the first time we're having somebody on from Germany. So I'm gonna have to ask, like, Thomas, how did you actually get involved, with, asking questions, diving into, the history of Islam and all of that? Like, how? Like, it's such a bizarre topic. Most people ask me,
That's
like, how, why are you actually interested in this stuff? Like, is you're a bit weird for that? I just wanted to know, how did you get interested?
so in my case, I was always interested in history and also in religion and history of religion. But initially, I wasn't interested in Islam at all because I figured, everything. Well, it's also clear, right? I mean, I've only heard about this tangentially, but it felt like, this is all well documented. There's nothing interesting there. And then around 20 years ago, I randomly listened to a radio interview with a scholar named Karl-Heinz Ohlig, and he was the founder of the Inara School, which was associated with the University of Saarbrücken, and they were applied critical analysis to the Quran. And in that interview, he said things that like blew my mind. The word Muhammad was actually a title for Jesus, for example, and that he didn't exist. And I was like, how is this even possible? And he mentioned like coins with crosses on them and all that sort of thing. And I thought, well, this is really interesting. I need to look into this. And I followed the applications of this in our group ever since. Just privately, so I didn't do anything with it, just for my own benefit. And then last year, actually, I wrote a comment on Jay Smith's channel where he talked about the Dome for Doc, I think, or I'm not sure exactly even what the topic for the video was about. But my point was, I was trying to open up this world of this critical Quran scholarship that's happening in Germany and in Europe to the English-speaking audience, because obviously they weren't aware of what was going on here for decades now. And then he invited me on, and this is how everything got started. And now, I've had many sessions with him, and I've got my own YouTube channel, and since this year, and I was by accident sort of that I came on this platform.
So you're telling me all from the back of one comment on YouTube?
Yeah, that's it.
Wow. and your channel is absolutely amazing. Let me actually share
Oh,
my
thank you.
screen right now. Like, yeah, I think the first time I actually heard of of your work and your channel is actually on Jay Smith. So,
Yeah.
family, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel, of course. Like, we're here to support our very own, our scholars, our individuals that we look up to in the field. That's actually bringing a lot of this information to light to us. And this is Thomas Alexander. Like, please go hit the subscribe button. Go check out his shows. As you can see, like, you know, you can see the little red lines underneath, right? You can see the red lines. That means, yeah, that's how you know I've been watching his stuff. Yeah, that's how you know I'm not just talking it. Yeah, I'm here. I'm fully on. Yeah. This is my guy right now, Thomas Alexander. You're seeing the guys
Well,
that
thank you.
I look up to and say, yeah, these are the guys that I want to associate myself with and actually just sit at these guys and learn something. You know, earlier on you made mention of one of the legends himself, Karl Heinz Ulrich. There you go.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
know most of you guys may have heard of this book. Yeah, The Hidden Origins of Islam, another banger. Okay, if you haven't already got it, okay, Amazon. I should actually have an Amazon affiliate link. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's basically the book that I got started with, and that was the first in our book. I think the second was also translated to English, but there are now 8 more, and they only exist in German. So that's why I thought I need to bring this more to an English-speaking audience, so that they know what's going on here.
Excellent, excellent. So I gotta ask, like, what like I don't already know. So what have you got for us today? What exactly are you going to be presenting to us today?
Well, so how this all started was in one of the presentations I did with Jay Smith. I mentioned somewhere as a side note, sort of that this mentioning of Muhammad in the Quran, like there are 4 mentionings of Muhammad in the Quran. And one of them in Surah 33 is explicitly talking about like a person, a historical person, whereas the other ones, they can be read as titles for Jesus, right? But this one mentioning in 33 specifically about the prophet. And I mentioned that, yeah, this is an interpolation, and David Powers has shown this in his book. And then questions came in, or can you explain this? How is this an interpolation? And so Jay asked me, well, can you do like a presentation on this? I said, I guess I can, but it's gonna be complex because we have to go a wide swing. We have to do a wide swing basically. We have to cover a lot of ground. But I say I'll get to it. And so far, I haven't presented it on his channel yet. It is on mine, so those who are subscribed, they will have seen it. But for everybody else, this will be brand new. And I will sort of show how we know that this surah or this verse about Muhammad was an interpolation. But it won't be immediately obvious that's where we're heading in the beginning, because as I said, like we're taking a bit of a detour initially. But it's all, it all comes.
Hey, I told you guys we got a powerful show for you guys, right? And before I actually jump into that, yeah, you just made mention of something. I don't know if this is being shown. All
Yes.
right, let me maximize my screen a little bit. Again, what we constantly do over here on Titans TV, we always show and tell. So I don't know if you're familiar with Titans TV much, and I'm talking about my listening audience right now. Over here, we have got a mantra. Okay. If you are truthful, then provide your evidence. Okay. And this is one thing you're going to get on Titans TV. We don't just speak from our, we always show our citations and our sources. Yeah. Thomas just made mention of another big book, another big scholar. Okay. Muhammad is not the father of any of your men. The Making of the Last Prophet, David S. Powers. Okay. He goes into a lot of this information that's going to be presented today. I just want to make sure you have the source. Yes. If you want to go and actually make the purchase, support these authors, support these scholars, make the purchase. I'm telling you, it's going to be worth it. Okay. Or you can always holler at me and I'll drop you a little PDF copy. But Behind the scenes, behind the scenes. But anyways, yeah. All right, I want to actually get into this presentation because it is going to be a bangers. Let me just make sure it's being shared. Yeah, it's being shared. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah, let's get into this. I'm
let's
gonna
get into it.
mute my mic for now. But family tree, if you guys want to ask a question or drop a comment, I already said it. Simply hit the super chat. Okay. I'm not reading out any questions or comments unless there's super chats. Okay. It could be as little as 199. Okay. But show some love. We've got a big boy scholar on, a big boy educator on right now. Okay. And he's going to drop some fire to us. Okay. So please support the channel. Hit us up with a super chat and we will read out your comments and your questions. All right. Let's get it.
All right. Yeah, I'll just jump straight into it. So as you can see, this is titled number 6. That means there were five presentations beforehand. So if you want to see them, you have to head over to my channel. But today we want to look at this interpolation, and that's why I called this the changing the Quran. And I've split it up into 6 sections. The first one that we're going to look at is called the Seerah as context for the Quran. And yeah, let's jump straight in. So the thing about the Quran is, and that's something I did go over, do go over in the first 5 parts of my presentation. So I'm now condensing it here real quick. Is that so the thing about the Quran is without external context, the Quran cannot be understood. So Muslims today, they have the Hadith and the Seerah and the Sunnah to provide the context, to make sense of the text. But the evidence shows that this was a much later development. Right? So that started at least 100 years after sort of the Quran. Islam is originally believed to have begun, and the Quran is originally believed to have been written. So there used to be a different context, and I'm arguing it is a Christian one. Originally, the context of the Quran was the Bible, and it was Jewish and Christian apocrypha, and it was a specific group of Christians who had this, who used those writings, and those were anti-Trinitarians who believed in sort of an adoptionist Christology, or which is sometimes also called a monarchianist Christology. Meaning that they believed that Jesus was just a man. He was not the Son of God. He was the Messiah, and he was the messenger of God. But that's it. Sort of, he was a prophet like the ones before him. Maybe more important, or certainly more important, because he was the Messiah, but he wasn't divine. And that's sort of the understanding with which the Quran was written. And initially, this word Muhammad did apply to Jesus, because it can be read as the Blessed One, so as a title for Jesus himself. But obviously this has changed at some point, right? So I'm calling this Muhammad 1 and Muhammad 2. So Muhammad 1, that's a title for Jesus, and Muhammad 2, that's the Prophet of Islam. And exactly. And this, as I just said, this life of Muhammad became the new context, and entire narratives have been created to make sense of dark or obscure passages in the Quran. For example, Surah 9:100 talks about immigrants and helpers who are guaranteed paradise. And this is sort of the passage in the Quran that is nowadays understood as referring to the Hijrah. But really, without this external context, you would come to this conclusion that this is about Muhammad fleeing from Mecca to Medina. This is just, wouldn't be like, you wouldn't understand it that way if you hadn't this previous knowledge, which, as I just mentioned, was created hundreds of years after the Quran. So why immigrants and why helpers? And then, for example, like one of the scholars I'm following, who is in this Inara group, which I mentioned, is Robert Kerr. And he has shown that the terms muhajirin and ansar, which are used here, are actually their roots translate to don't translate to immigrants and helpers, but to Arabs and Christians. Now, this is just an example, and I don't want to go into this too much, but just to illustrate how this context has changed. All right. At the end of the day, the Arabs, however, ended up with this misunderstood passage, which did make sense. So they constructed a new context and based it on the Prophet Muhammad. So he became sort of the canvas on which to paint all of this context, if you will. Okay, and so how do we know, how does this work? So traditionally, historians have always assumed that the biography of Muhammad is basically correct. They just crossed out everything supernatural. But even that's not always straightforward. For example, while it's easy to imagine that Muhammad only dreamt about his ascent into heaven, you can't really use this method to apply to the Battle of Badr, for example, because you have to rewrite the story. Either you have to turn it into a major battle with huge armies, or you have to turn it into a tiny skirmish, but the way it is described just wouldn't work. But this approach is also something that historians usually wouldn't accept in any other field of research. And that's why you see this picture here. This is a page from a manuscript about a medieval legend. This depicts the story of Hildebrand, who was a Germanic hero. We do have sort of biographies about him. We do have lots of stories about his exploits, but no historian would say, yeah, well, except for the supernatural parts, like the magic swords and all that, this is basically correct. No, everybody agrees he's a mythical figure, even though we have all those texts, which happen to be created around the same time as the hadiths, right? So they, but still, yeah, nobody takes this seriously. And the same is true for many ancient characters, for instance. Jason the Argonaut, Romulus, the founder of Rome, and so on. Like nobody believes that those stories, that there's like a historical person behind them. They were legends, obviously, but the same is not true in Islam. For some reason, nobody dares to question this fundamental belief or yeah. So if we apply the same skepticism to the biography of Muhammad that we apply to everything else in history, we can try to reverse engineer the creation process. And what's striking is the fact that virtually every piece of Muhammad's life, as it is told in the Sunnah and the Seerah, gives context to one or more verses in the Quran, almost as yeah, as if that was the intention behind it, right? So we can formulate a hypothesis. The life of Muhammad was constructed to provide a new context for the Quran after the original context, which I mentioned, the Bible and the Apocrypha, were no longer understood as such. This doesn't necessarily mean that we are looking at a deliberate fraud, though. So this is something that can happen naturally. We're likely looking at scholars who did not know the story of how the Quran was proclaimed, and they wrote down sort of wonderings of how this came to be, sort of storytelling as a form of exegesis. And the more of those wanderings were put to parchment, the more plausible it all looked, because then it all fit together, because it was constructed to fit together, but it wasn't obvious to the people who read it that this was constructed to fit together. So in this case, it would be perfectly circular to explain the Quran according to the Prophet's biography. Rather, we'd have to do the opposite. We have to explain the biography with the Quran. So the question is, can we test this? And the answer is to a degree. Yeah. For example, we have different, well, as you're probably all aware that we have different readings of the Quran, different traditions. The most popular version of the Quran today is the so-called Hafs version, which was codified, if you will, in I think that was 1924 in Cairo, but then really made sort of official, at least for the Sunni world, I think in the 1980s when Saudi Arabia officially adopted it. But there's other versions out the readings. And if you look, for example, at Surah 2:119, it says, "And you will not be asked about those in hell," in the Hafs version. And this is in the tradition explained as, as Muhammad, he grew distraught about the refusal of the Jews to believe in him. And God revealed this passage so that Muhammad would not feel responsible for their disbelief and subsequent condemnation to hell. So that's the context that was sort of created for this verse to make sense of it. However, in the Nafi reading of the Quran, this verse reads differently. It's just a tiny change. As you can see, it's only this little change which I've put a circle around. But now it reads, and do not ask about those in hell. Okay, now this explanation doesn't work anymore, that Muhammad shouldn't feel responsible for the Jews who end up in hell. Because here it's about those who are already in hell. So what's the explanation for that? As it turns out, the scholars who follow the Nafi reading insist that God revealed this verse when Muhammad was worried about the eternal fate of his parents who had died before he preached Islam. So what we see is two completely different stories about the revelation of this passage, which is in line with the respective reading thereof. So the context follows the reading, not the other way around. The story about Muhammad follows the reading of the Quran. And here's another example. This time I'll go over it a bit more quickly. So again, Hafs version in the...
Yeah, just sorry. Quick question. If you can go back to the last slide.
Sure.
So you're basically saying that a hadith, was it a hadith or a Seerah, somewhere in the Seerah literature, hadith was made up to explain the Hafs reading. And then when there was a Nafi reading, a subsequent hadith was made up to explain the verse as well.
To be honest, I'm not sure that Hafs was first. That we would need to check out. Hafs is definitely not the oldest reading. There are definitely much older ones. But yeah, that's the thing, exactly. So the different readings, they sometimes have quite a big difference in the way they read a verse. So that there's difference in meaning, like here. You will not be asked those in hell, or do not ask those in hell. And then the explanation doesn't fit anymore, and you need to come up with a different explanation. So who was first here? I don't know. But yeah, that's the basic thing we're seeing here.
Okay. All right, let's go.
Cool. Yeah, and as I said here, the same thing again. This time with Surah 288. Our hearts are sealed in the Hafs version, or our hearts are containers in this version by Ahmad bin Musa. And now those Muslim scholars who follow the first reading explain that one day the Jews of Medina, exasperated by the Prophet's preaching, told him, our hearts are sealed, as in, we will not listen to what you say. Those who follow the second reading explain that one day the Jews of Medina wanted to flaunt their religious knowledge, and they told Muhammad, our hearts are containers, as in containers of the wisdom found in the Torah. And yeah, these cases suggest that many stories in the Prophet's biography are not memories of historical events, but rather stories told to explain material in the Quran. Okay. Now, the manner in which stories about Muhammad seem to be built from material found in the Quran seems fundamentally similar to the manner in which early Islamic sources tell stories about other prophets. So, for example, if you look at Surah 230, which is talking about Adam, it says, indeed, I'm setting on the earth a Khalifa. And Khalifa can mean either viceroy or successor. Now, at the time, most scholars rejected the first option. That would be in conflict with the traditional Islamic understanding of God as wholly unlike humanity. So there can't be a viceroy to God. Which leaves the second option. But now these scholars needed to explain how Adam, who was the first human after all, could be a successor to anyone. So Al-Tabari, for example, writes, the first to inhabit the earth were the jinn. They spread corruption thereon and shed blood and killed each other. So God sent Iblis against them with an army of angels, and Iblis and those with him killed them, pursuing them as far as the islands of the oceans and the summits of the mountains. He then created Adam and settled him thereon. That is why he has said, I am about to place a Khalifa on earth. So this story neatly explains why the Quran calls Adam Khalifa, but obviously this story is legendary in character. There couldn't have been any witnesses who could have remembered or written down these events. Like there couldn't be an isnad from Adam all the way to when this was written down. And such stories are so common in early Muslim commentaries that it seems likely that the earliest stage of Islamic exegesis involved, above all, the telling of stories meant to explain passages within the Quran, which is what I said before. So it's not necessarily like a big conspiracy or a fraud. It's a form of exegesis that's at the bottom of this. All right. Then one more point. In critical historical studies, there is a so-called criterion of embarrassment. And that is a tool or a type of analysis in which an account is considered likely to be true if the author would have no reason to invent an account which might embarrass them. So, for example, in biblical scholarship, this criterion has been used to argue that Jesus was really baptized by John the Baptist and that Jesus was really crucified, because if one were to invent a Messiah figure, one wouldn't have included these details, which go against the Jewish expectation of the time. Right, so the Messiah wouldn't be baptized by somebody else, and he would be killed. That's at least what most Jews would have believed back then. So if we were to invent a Messiah, you wouldn't include that. So that's why scholars say it's likely true, that it likely happened. Similarly, it has been argued that the episode of Muhammad reciting the infamous satanic verses is a case where the criterion of embarrassment applies. So in Surah 53, verses 19 to 20, it says, "Have you considered El-Lat and El-Uzza and Manat the third, the other? These were the pagan goddesses of the Arabs, the daughters of Allah." The associated story is that Satan put these words into Muhammad's mouth. And some historians argue that if one were to invent a prophet, one wouldn't invent a story wherein Satan put words into the mouth of that prophet. That would be embarrassing. However, when we look at the commentaries of Surah 53, for example, in Al-Tabari, then we do not find the story about Satan whispering a false revelation into Muhammad's ear. Instead, the story is mentioned in relation to Surah 22, verse 52, where it says, "And we did not send before you any messenger or prophet, except that when he spoke, Satan cast into it some misunderstanding." So, as we see, we can, as we see, it was of vital importance that Muhammad was uttering satanic verses, because otherwise he could not have been a prophet according to this reading of the Quran. So once again, when we're looking at this at an episode, we're looking at an episode in Muhammad's life that was likely constructed much later in order to explain Surah 22, verse 52, not Surah 53, 19 to 20. Okay, so that was part one. And let's just...
Part one. Part two. Hey, listen, let me give you a quick break. Catch your breath.
Okay.
Have a glass of water quickly. Hey, listen, family, let me know that you're enjoying the show right now. You know what I'm asking for. Hit up the like button, hit the thumbs up button. This is a big show. Come on, let's get it going, family. Let's get it going. Again, tell a friend to tell a friend. We're live right now with Thomas Alexander, and we're speaking about we're gonna go into the origins of Muhammad. We're getting there. We're getting there. Yeah. Let me actually do this real quickly. Let me share my screen. Okay. I'm gonna ask you guys, to obviously show some love to Titans TV, but obviously Thomas Alexander has his own YouTube channel, which we have showed already. We will show it again, but he also has his Patreon account. Okay. And I'm telling you guys, come and support. Come and support. These things that we do here are not for free. Okay. What I mean by it's not for free, just simply doing YouTube alone. Okay. Uploading these contents, we need to make sure we have high broadbands to actually, cope with the video footage. We need to make sure we buy cameras so the quality is good. We need to make sure we have presentation software so we can present to you guys good stuff. It takes a lot of resources to produce these videos, to produce these contents. And I haven't even got into the books. The amount of books, okay, that our brother has to actually read, digest, write notes upon, source, everything, just to give you guys, make what the scholars are saying, which is highly technical, highly technical. If you read some of these scholars, right, just 2 pages is filled. I'm saying 2 pages is filled with footnotes for like about 5 pages. There's about 5 pages worth of actual work, and there's another like at least 2 pages worth of footnotes that these scholars go through. Okay, and most of us, we're actually going through those footnotes as well, reading those scholars, see where they disagree, comparing, contrast. Like, listen, it's a lot of work. Okay, it's a lot of time. Okay, our brother could be doing anything else, than being here on a Wednesday night giving you this information for free. If you go to university right now, you're spending, I don't know, I think it's like 10,000, 9,000. I don't know how much it is now, £9,000 per year just to learn this type of information. So please, man, show some love. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button on his channel. You can obviously join the Patreon, see which one best suits you. 3, 6, £11.50 a month. There'll be different, the breakdown is there. I don't want to go in too much with the breakdown, okay? So yeah, please, man, go and show the support, please. I don't know, did you want to say anything on that?
Well, thank you very much. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So all the books, that's, I guess, the biggest chunk. So, and the time, obviously, time in the books, is definitely it's a lot of work, which you wouldn't know unless you tried. So I mean, I would say try it, but it's definitely hard work.
Definitely. So again, and also, I see you guys, Ibn Abdullah. Yeah, I see you, my guy. I see you dropping questions and stuff. Like, I like that question. I like the question that you dropped. I'm gonna actually just quickly highlight it, but only for a quick flash. That was a nice question that you asked right there. But what I'm gonna say is, again, we've stated, hit us up with the super chats, family tree. If you want your comments to be shown on the screen, if you want your questions to be asked and answered, hit us up with the super chat. We'll stop, the presentation, and we get those questions answered as well. Okay. Obviously, at the end of the presentation, we're also going to give you guys. I see you, Hassan. Sheikh Hassan. I see you as well. Yeah, we're going to give you guys the opportunity to come on and actually, talk with the Titans means that we like other Titans coming on and clashing. We like our other Titans coming on and having disagreements to say, like, nope, I don't agree with you there. And then our other Titan will be like, is it? You don't agree with me, yeah? Big man sing, let me show you what that has to say. Tell me what you don't agree with. So we like that. We like that interaction, like that speaker's corner debating interaction. We like it. Okay. So if you want to come on at the end of the show, end of the presentation, we will be sharing the link as well, where you could jump on and you could ask your questions. And of course, obviously, for those of you guys who want to say, Thomas, you know what? Blooming hell, mate, that was a great job, fella. That was a great job. You're also fully welcome to come on and do that as well. Okay. All right, family tree. Let's get back into this. Yeah. Right. We've had enough of our break. Let's do this. Let me share the screen. There you go. Boom. All right.
Okay. So, let's continue with part 2. So this one I called the Seerah Quran feedback. So in part 1, I showed you like how the Seerah was constructed to explain the Quran. But now we want to look at how this construction and in return could also influence the Quran itself. So the earliest biography of Muhammad was supposedly written by Ibn Ishaq around 760 AD. Ibn Ishaq quotes 400 continuous verses from 7 surahs. But in there, 53 verses are missing. So the argument that I'm now making is that these verses were likely later additions to the Quran. So Ibn Ishaq wasn't aware of them or couldn't have been aware of them. So he couldn't quote them. So for example, Surah 48, 28, and 29. Ibn Ishaq's discussion of Surah 48 ends with verse 27. Now, 29 is an unusually long verse, and that's something that's always a sort of a sign that something odd's going on. So if you have a sequence of lots and lots of short verses, and there's one massive verse, that smells of interpolation. Because it doesn't fit into the whole structure. So when discussing Surah 2, 103, however, which is about the hypocrites and the Jews, Ibn Ishaq quotes a letter which Muhammad supposedly wrote to the Jews explaining the verse in question. So the verse being Surah 2, 103. And in it he writes, "And if they had believed and feared Allah, then the reward from Allah would have been far better if they only knew." And lo and behold, Surah 48, 29 is taken verbatim from the letter quoted by Ibn Ishaq when explaining Surah 2, 103. So here we have an example of a feedback where the Seerah, which was written to provide context for the Quran, itself influenced the contents of the Quran. Now, the next biography that we have is that of al-Waqidi, and his was written roughly about 810 AD, and in there, verse 29 is already included. However, verse 28 is still missing. Verse 28 reads, "It is he who sent his messenger with guidance and the religion of truth to manifest it over all religion, and sufficient is Allah as witness." Now this is basically taken from, verbatim from a coin from the Umayyad era, which read, "Muhammad is the messenger of God, sent with guidance and the religion of truth to manifest it over all religion." So this is interesting for multiple reasons. If Surah 48:28 was already part of the Quran before the coin in question was minted, which is the traditional view, right? The Quran existed as it is today before 697. That's what we've always been told. But if that's true, if they were true, then it would be inconceivable that the text of the Quran would have been altered in such a way. It's the word of God, after all. Right? So if you remember, the coin starts with Muhammad. The verse in the Quran doesn't. However, if the coin preceded the verse in the Quran, then this can be explained, because the following verse, 29, starts out with the phrase, "Muhammad is the messenger of God." So if you put something in there before this verse, and both start with Muhammad, that would sound odd, and that wouldn't, you wouldn't do that. Having it twice in a row would sound strange. Instead, the editors completed the quote from the coin by inserting the remainder before verse 29. Another example, Surah 9:40. This surah narrates the passage of Muhammad's biography where he and Abu Bakr hide in a cave during their flight from Mecca to Medina. It is one of the very few passages within the Quran where Muhammad clearly talks about an event in his life within the Quran. So that hardly ever happens. This passage has also been added between 760 and 810. So we don't have it in Ibn Ishaq, but we have it in al-Waqidi. It is not, and multiple verses regarding pilgrimage in Surahs 2, 5, 14, 22, and 48 are also examples of this. So these passages are first found in the Seerah, and only later do commentators refer to these verses. So here we have something along the lines of the letter of Ibn Ishaq's biography, which later became a verse in the Quran. Now, interesting for us now is the story of Zaid and Zainab. If you remember, Muhammad's adopted son Zaid is married to Zainab. And then in Surah 33, 36 to 38, we learn that Zaid is unhappy with his marriage. And Muhammad falls for Zainab, but tells Zaid to keep her, But then God reveals to Muhammad that he should marry Zainab. Zaid divorces her so that she can marry again. Now, elements of verse 37 are taken verbatim from Muqatil ibn Sulaiman's tafsir, which is from roughly 760 AD. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad's companion Anas ibn Malik, as well as Jews and even polytheists, complained, quote, Muhammad has married the wife of his son at the same time that he forbids us to do the same, end quote. Now, strangely, Surah 4, verse 23 seems to allow the marriage to the wife of an adopted son, as it only prohibits marriage to the wife of a natural son. So this is in contradiction to that quote that we have just mentioned. And this indicates that Surah 4, verse 23 was altered at a later point in time to conform with Surah 33, verse 37, once it was added. Right, so if the Quran forbids the marriage to your daughter-in-law, then Muhammad would be in contradiction with God's law, and that can't happen. So that's why the Quran had to be changed. So now if I'm trying to visualize this, so 33, 37 was added. We gave her to you in marriage, the wives of their adopted sons. And because it was added, Surah 4:23 had to be revised. And now it reads, prohibited to you are the wives of your sons who are from your loins. Okay, that was part 2. And I think we can go straight ahead to part 3, because now we need to look at the story of Zaid a bit more, because this is going to be important. And first of all, we need to, again, do a bit of a detour and look at Muslim perspective on salvation history. So in the Islamic tradition, God sends prophets to humanity with instructions about how to attain eternal life. And the office of prophecy is the exclusive possession of a single family, the descendants of Abraham. Over time, the divine revelations were, however, distorted, or so the Muslims believe. Hence, God sent Muhammad, a direct descendant of Abraham, in order to restore the true message. Only the faithful and accurate preservation of the revelations received by Muhammad make it possible for the Muslim community to assert with confidence that he was the last prophet and that the office of prophecy terminated upon his death. How to mean it? Obviously, Muslims today believe that Muhammad is the last prophet. But if in the past the message has always been distorted over time, first by the Jews and by the Christians, then this could happen again. So that's why now we need a safeguard to make it possible for Muhammad to be the last prophet. So the message cannot be distorted again in the future. Okay, so in the beginning, I've already talked about Muhammad 1 and Muhammad 2. So now we need to go there again. So Muhammad 1, as I said, is the praised one, i.e. it was a reference to Jesus. And that can, for example, be seen in the inscription in the Dome of the Rock, which is one of the earliest inscriptions that we have at all, and which is basically all about Christology. And it starts out with Muhammad, and really, if you read it in context, it can only refer to Jesus. And then eventually we ended up with Muhammad 2, the seal of all prophets, i.e. the last prophet. But this doesn't happen overnight, so there had to be steps in between. So I'm now sort of postulating that they are sort of an alpha and a beta version of Muhammad 2 before we got to the final result. So the alpha version would be a preacher who taught the Arabs the gospel according to an anti-Trinitarian adoptionist form of Christianity. So he would just be a preacher, nothing special, no prophet, no messenger. And that's how a lot of parts, particularly the Meccan surahs, read. They read like a preacher talking to a congregation. If you read it, like if you ignore this context of the Sunnah and the Seerah that we all have in the back of our minds, but if you ignore that, you just look at the Quran, it reads very much like a preacher talking to a congregation, not like an angel talking to Muhammad. But from there, we got to a beta version, and this would then be a prophet like the prophets before. But the problem, just like the teachings of the prophets before him, his teachings could also be superseded. That's what I mentioned before. Right? If the teachings can't be superseded, then everything's up for grabs. So that's not nice. So for the ruling Abbasids, whose legitimacy relied upon the truth of Islam, new prophets could pose a major threat. Therefore, it became necessary to cement the religion by declaring Muhammad the seal of the prophets, the last prophet, and then thereby fixing the message. Right. Once the seal of the prophets narrative was established, it was of utmost importance that Muhammad did not have any sons, because as we've seen in Arab salvation history, the office of a prophet can only run within the family through a male lineage. If everyone knows that Muhammad didn't have any sons, there cannot be any new pretenders, making Muhammad the seal of the prophets by default. A narrative was constructed so as to make it clear that all of Muhammad's natural sons died before reaching the age of puberty, and Muhammad's adopted son, Zaid, has the sole function to make it possible for Muhammad to become the last prophet. He was adopted so that Muhammad could end adoption, thereby making sure that everyone knows Muhammad didn't have any sons, natural or adopted. Without sons, there cannot be any more prophets. So, who's this Zaid? He's a figure of salvation history. He has no function in secular history, and he condenses many religious symbols in him. So he's like Joseph, but instead of welcoming family reunification, he rejects his family in favor of his slave master. He mirrors Solomon as the beloved whom God and you yourself have bestowed favor. Like Ishmael, he's repudiated by his father so that he won't be the heir. He becomes Abraham's trusted servant who secures a wife for Isaac when he informs Zainab of her marriage to the prophet. And like Uriah the Hittite, he is sent to certain death on a battlefield in southern Jordan by the man who fell in love with his wife. And like Isaac, some Jewish Rashim is sacrificed by his father. Okay. So in order to end adoption, Zaid has to pass 5 tests, and thereby making Muhammad the last prophet. So he needs to remain with Muhammad instead of returning to his family. So that's what he said. He rejects family reunification. He needs to expose himself to public humiliation by divorcing his wife so that she can marry his father. He has to endure the personal humiliation of informing his former wife that she is to be married to her father-in-law. He has to relinquish his status as Muhammad's son, his name, Zaid bin Muhammad, and the right to inherit from the prophet. And at the end, he has to willingly give up his life for the sake of Muhammad and Islam. So by the end of this process, adoption is abolished, despite previously being an established institution among the Arabs. Muhammad's own life story exemplifies this abolition. He famously adopted a son, and then he rejected him as his son, leaving Muhammad without male heir, and the office of prophecy hence no longer occupied, sealing the dogma of Muhammad as the last prophet. So, Muhammad's marriage to Zainab also mirrors biblical stories. So, for example, in Matthew 1:18-21, when Joseph believes that Mary had been unfaithful and contemplates divorcing her, an angel appears to him saying, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife," which mirrors the angel telling Muhammad that he should take Zainab as his wife, despite having reservations because she's the wife of his son. In Samuel 11:6-27, David covets Uriah the Hittite's wife, Bathsheba, commits adultery, and sends Uriah to his death. And just like Uriah, Zaid is sent to his death in battle. The negative portrayal of David in 2 Samuel is one of the reasons why the Arabs accused the Jews of having corrupted the scripture. So the story was told with the means of previous biblical stories, clearly showing that we're not dealing with secular history, but with salvation history. And with the story of Zaid and Zainab, we have a second reason for why episodes in Muhammad's life were created. In this case, it was not about providing context, but about legitimizing Abbasid rule. So these were later addition, deliberately made to legitimize their rule. Okay, so that was part 3. Halfway through. Now, part 4, I've called cascading changes. And we've already seen this previously. So when you make one change, often you have to make other changes as well to remain consistent. So here I've previously shown this slide where we've learned that how the addition of Surah 33, 37, wherein marriage to the wife of an adopted son was deemed legal, necessitated a revision of Surah 4, 23 in order to remove a contradiction. And as a reminder, this was an important building block in establishing Muhammad as the last prophet. So the narrative of Muhammad as the seal of the prophets was important in order to legitimize Abbasid rule. The religion of Muhammad was their state religion, and they could not tolerate the possibility of some new wannabe prophet throwing a wrench in their gears. However, the fact that adoptions were no longer legally recognized due to the story of Muhammad and Zaid, because of that, other verses were all of a sudden obsolete and had to be adapted. So now let's zoom in onto Surah 4:23. So here we see this surah deals with marriage, in particular, whom one is not allowed to marry. And as we can see, Surah 4:23 is almost a direct copy of Leviticus 18:5-18. There are a few differences, but there's almost a one-to-one relationship. There's also a linguistic relationship. The kinship terms in Hebrew and Arabic are closely related. For our purposes, we want to look at one relationship in particular, which does stick out. Here we see the revision in the Quranic text. Daughters-in-law was changed to wives of your sons who are from your loins, in order to be compatible with the newly added verse 37 in Surah 33. But if we now look at Leviticus, we can now reconstruct how Surah 4:23 initially must have looked like. So it must have said something along the lines of, prohibited to you are your daughters-in-law. Okay, now let's go back to comparing this. So let's look at the term for daughter-in-law again. So we can see a clear relation across all Semitic languages, which I've displayed here on the slide. Only Arabic sticks out. The term is crucially different. Kanna has a different root than kalla. And so all the other Semitic languages have the root kalla, and only Arabic has kanna. And for comparison, in the case of son-in-law, there is the same root as well. So there is the Arabic does not stick out. On the flip side, the Arabic kinship term kalala for collateral relatives, so that is more distant relatives, not brother sister, but more distant relatives. They are called collateral relatives. This word has the same root as kalla in the other Semitic languages, but in return, now kalala is also unique among all Semitic languages. This only exists in Arabic. So let's focus on this term kalala for a second. The word kalala occurs twice in the Quran, once in Surah 4:12 and again in 4:176. The word has initially been a mystery. The second Caliph Umar is reported to have said that he would rather know the meaning of this word than possess an amount of money equal to the poll tax levied on the fortresses of Byzantium. Eventually, the word was defined as either a man who dies leaving neither parent or child, or a person's relatives except for parents and children, i.e. collateral relatives. So, Surahs 4:12 and 4:176 deal with inheritance law, and particularly verse 12 is full of grammatical and linguistic oddities and difficulties. Starting with the earliest exegetes, scholars have always struggled with these verses. So we are looking at a reinterpretation of the term daughter-in-law. So this is what the evidence suggests, right? So, because if we look at the connection through all the Semitic languages, it seems very likely that we're looking at a reinterpretation here, that originally Kalala was actually Kalla. And it was, and originally, so when looking at this verse 4:12, adopted daughters could inherit. But with the abolition of adoption, these verses had to be changed. So now I'm trying to visualize this again here. So today, 4:12 reads, if a man or woman is inherited by collateral relatives, ... Yeah. But originally, it likely read something along the lines of, if a man designates a daughter-in-law or wife as heir. Okay, but with this revision, new problems arose. Now, out of a specific rule regarding women who are not part of the bloodline, i.e. wives and adopted daughters, the scribes have constructed a very broad category, replacing them with collateral relatives who are part of the bloodline. This change opens up many questions on the specifics regarding inheritance, and those questions needed answering, and hence it was necessary to add these answers to the text, which brings us to the aforementioned verse 176 in Surah 4, where the term Kalala occurs for a second time. And in Surah 4, 176, we're provided with the necessary clarifications in inheritance law. We can therefore conclude that Surah 4, 176 was an addition made necessary by the changes to verse 12. But we are not done yet. So at this point, the very existence of Zaid still threatens the doctrine of the finality of the prophecy, Zaid's untimely death helped matters, but in the story, he is survived by his son Usama. And if Zaid continued to bear the name of Zaid ibn Muhammad at the time of his death, then the office of prophecy would have passed from Zaid to Usama. Usama himself had 5 sons, so the early Muslim community had to find a way to sever the filial relationship between Muhammad and Zaid. We've already heard that Zaid lost his status as the Prophet's son when Muhammad abolished adoption. And this is clearly proclaimed in Surah 33, verse 40, where it states that Muhammad is not the father of any of your men. And this is the one occurrence of the word Muhammad in the Quran, which clearly refers to the Prophet. So, Surah 33:40 was therefore also added. This is one of, but then, exactly, one loophole still remains. So from the Kitab al-Masahif, we know of codices ascribed to 4 different companions. Those are Ubay ibn Ka'b, ibn Masud, al-Rabi, ibn Kutayam, and ibn Abbas, which are reported to have included the following variant of Surah 33:6. Quote, the Prophet has a stronger affinity to the believers than they do themselves. He is their father and his wives are their mothers, end quote. With Muhammad being the father of the believers, people could be led to conclude that the office of prophecy is now open for all Muslims. Therefore, today the Quran reads, quote, the Prophet has a stronger affinity to the believers than they do themselves, and his wives are their mothers, end quote. So even without the context of the previous readings, this verse feels like something is missing. And the passage, and his wives are their mothers, it doesn't really fit, right? And now we know why. So now we can further reconstruct our picture here. With the deletion of the offending phrase in 33:6, the holes have been plugged. Muhammad is now confirmed to not having left any male heir. At the same time, inconsistencies that were introduced by these interpolations have been removed. We've started with 33:37. There we've seen that Ibn Ishaq did not mention this verse, while the next generation of commentators did. And by deducing the reason for why this insertion was made, we could identify cascading changes to the Quran, which seem to be supported by linguistic peculiarities, particularly the obscure word kalala. However, this is still very much a simplified picture. I've only focused on the core changes. For example, Surah 33 verses 36 to 40 are all later insertions. Similarly, Surah 33 verses 4 and 5 have likely also been revised. And there are potentially even more related insertions, but these are the core ones. But now I've also here added a couple more. So yeah. Okay. And that's the end of part 4. And now it's about to see if we can prove that this picture that I've just drawn is correct. Because so far, this is a theory based on, well, I would argue it's has substance to it, but we still need a little bit more.
Jeez, let's get it. Let's get it. Let's get it. Oh man. Let me see. Let me wait. Let me just be shown for a minute. Because my brother's been talking for quite some time. I want to know, Family Tree, are you enjoying the show so far? Let me know. Let me know. Hit us up in the comment section. Hit us up with the likes as well. I want to hear your thoughts, okay? You already know, super chat us or tag Titans TV to get my attention. Otherwise, y'all just talking to yourselves in the comment section, okay? So come on, let's get it. Let's get it. All right. Are we ready? If so, let us go.
All right. Wait, let me go to full screen again. So yeah, let's continue where we were. So we've created this beautiful picture, which makes a lot of sense, but can we prove it? So obviously with theories, you can never prove them 100%, but you can test predictions, and that's what we're going to do. So we want to look at some of the oldest manuscripts out there. In this case, one is called the Codex Parisino Petropolitanus. And here we're looking at a certain page from this text. This is folio 10V. V stands for verso, which is the left side or the back side. And a folio is a piece of parchment, typically with writings on both sides of the page. Yeah, and as I said, V stands for the back side, so that's what we're looking at here. So on this page, we have 21 lines of text, which is average for this manuscript. It contains parts of Surah 4. Verse 12 spans from line 12 to 21 and continues on to the next page. And we can here see clear signs of a secondary layer put on much later than the original text, roughly 2 centuries later, in fact. So in line 3, the editor added a different verse separator than anywhere else. So usually we have here we'll get to it in a minute. So, and let me just continue here with those things. So in lines 14 to 21, he redrew letters that were fading away. And unlike the original script, the editor's letters are thinner and upright instead of slanted to the right. So, which is indicative of the age. So this is 200 years later. This is what's called Abbasid bookhand script. But there's one word in particular which we want to look at in more detail, and that's the word kalala. If you remember, that does play an important role in this. And that's in line 18. Let's zoom in on this a little bit. So, looking at it more closely, we can see that the word kalala did not fade. It was actively scratched out. The letter kaf is a mixture of the editor's layer, so what was added afterwards, and an older layer. But in the Hijazi script of the original writer, the kaf would only occupy less than half of a line. I don't know if you can see my mouse pointer.
Yeah, we can see it.
Sure. Okay, good. So this is the kaf. As you can see, so he's using this old layer underneath to make this kaf, and it's long and it goes the full height of the line. Now let's compare this to the kaf as it looks elsewhere in this manuscript. So this from the same manuscript. Here the kaf has a very short line up here. So since the editor has reused an existing line, and in the Hijazi script, the kaf is not written with such a long line, this must have been a different letter originally. And indeed, if we zoom in even more, we can see. So actually, this is difficult to see, or it's difficult to portray on a screen. You actually have to hold the physical parchment against the sun and then look at it from the other side, and then you can make out the older writing, because the ink they used is a bit corrosive. And what you can see is that the editor scratched out a letter lam, and he converted the lam into a kaf. The underlying kaf lam lam combination, so that's the old, in the past there were two lams, there were a kaf and two lams. That's what we can see. That's what you can see when you look at it against the light, and you can barely make it out here on the screen. So here you can see a scratched out lam. So underlying this was a kaf lam lam combination, and that is unusually tightly squeezed for this manuscript. From that, we can tell that there was actually a first editor. So here we see the work of a second editor who will work 200 years later, but there was a first editor editing the original in the original Hijazi style, and that was likely the original scribe himself. So the guy who wrote the original text, he made a mistake and he edited it slightly, he corrected himself. So what we find is, originally the kaf was only followed by one lam, not by two lams. If you see it, and that's why it's squeezed together. So he needed to make room for the additional lam. So a second lam was added in the place where originally there was the kaf, and it forced the scribe to move the kaf to the right a little bit, and it squeezed everything together. And then 2 centuries later, the second editor came in, and because this was such a mess here that he squeezed it all in, he scratched out the word and then converted the lam into a kaf, and then rewrote everything else in his Hijazi hands script with upright lams, two of them. Okay, so what can we tell from this? Surah 412 originally included the word kalla, not kalala, so with one lam. And as predicted in our theory, this verse originally spelled out inheritance rules for daughters-in-law. And this also solves the question regarding the missing word kalla in the Arabic language. The second lam was added later, creating an artificial word kalala, which doesn't exist in any other language. So if you look at this picture again, which I've shown you before, originally we now know that just like in every other Semitic language, the Arabic had the term kalla, and it was the term for daughter-in-law, and through the addition of the second lam, it was turned into kalala, which doesn't exist anywhere else. So this is sort of how it looked like originally. Okay, so we can sort of tick off the first bits. So we now know from the mistakes, or from this error that the editor made, or from the correction the editor made, that Surah 412 was indeed revised eventually at some point. Okay, and now let's just jump straight into the last part. Now here we look at some more at some other features of this script. So this time we're looking at folio 20R, so the front side of this folio. On this one, there are 27 lines of text. So if you remember, on the folio 10, there were 21 lines. And indeed, 27 lines is a lot more cramped than any other page in this codex. The 8 preceding pages all have 23 lines. In this one, well, yeah, doesn't. So typically in this manuscript, we have between 21 and 24 lines per page. So this one definitely sticks out. There are a few others that stick out, but yeah, these are clearly exceptions. Now, this folio contains Surah 4, verses 161 to 173. Now, let's look at the reverse side. So the back side. Here we have 25 lines, 24 lines of text plus 1 empty line in order to separate the next surah. So from 4 to 5. This contains Surah 4, verses 173 to 5, Surah 5, verse 4. Now, what we can already see here is that this folio has a highly irregular spacing. The first 6 lines go into the margins, and the line height is lower than on the rest of the page. So, for instance, if we move this, if we move this box anywhere else, it doesn't contain 6 lines; it only contains 5. Okay, something else is here. Normally, the scribe put in 2 rows of 3 horizontal dots each as verse separator. So here we have those examples. But then here is one instance where we have 4 vertical dots as verse separator. Here. And also, what's important to note here is that the scribe was using the Syrian verse ending system, which is slightly different compared to to the Cairo Quran that most people are familiar with. But of course, we're mostly interested in the word kalala, which we now know used to be kala. So on this folio, we can see that we have the regular Hijazi kaf without the long diagonal line. And also there are no edits or crammed in lams or anything of the sort. So there are no issues here. This is kalala and this always was kalala. But still, so the overall layout of this folio demands an explanation. So why are there 27 lines on 20R and why are the first 6 lines on 20V so crammed? And to find the answer, we have to turn back 1 page. And we find out that before folio 20, another page has been removed. The text is, however, still continuous, so nothing is missing. The missing page comes from the same piece of parchment as the ones before and after. And how do we know that? So in this manuscript, 1 large piece of parchment was turned into 8 folios by folding it 3 times. So you have a big rectangular piece of parchment, you fold it 3 times, then you bind it, and then you cut it open, and that's why you have a very specific pattern. Due to this folding, you have an alternating pattern of parchment with flesh side and with hair side, which you can distinguish. So normally you have flesh, hair, hair, flesh, flesh, hair, hair, flesh, flesh, hair, hair, flesh, and so on. But here we don't have that. Here we only have 7 folios from 1 piece of parchment, and the pattern is broken precisely. This page is missing. What does this tell us? It tells us that the scribe removed the missing folio before writing on the next one, because remember, nothing is missing in this Quran. I mean, there are bits and pieces missing, but in this section, nothing is missing. It's continuous from end of Surah 4 to the beginning of Surah 5. Yeah. What it also tells us is that obviously he removed the folio because there was an error that couldn't be corrected. Otherwise, there's no reason to just cut out a piece of parchment here. It's too valuable to just throw away. So it must have been a major error, because as we've seen before, he did correct the word kalla and turned it into kalala. So that was possible. He could have done something similar here, like scratched out an individual word or something. But no, he removed the entire page. So it must have been big. So yeah, so what was the error? So let's recap real quick. Folio 20, which the scribe used instead of the missing page, has several oddities. So 20R has 27 lines. Everything else before has 23 lines, and 20V has this unique spacing and different line heights when comparing top to bottom. Therefore, seems like the scribe had to fit in a lot more text than he first anticipated, which means an entire verse was missing, namely verse 176, which incidentally takes up 6 lines, exactly the amount of lines the scribe added to folios 20R and 20V combined. Which means that another prediction from our model has been confirmed. So we get the next tick. So 176 was added. Now, unfortunately, this is where our manuscript evidence leaves us, because this is just a fragment. It doesn't contain all those bits and pieces that we've figured out here. But let's look at what we have. So remember that it all started with the verse in the middle, Surah 33, 37. This verse was first found in Muqatil ibn Sulaiman's tafsir, suggesting that it was a later addition. But the tradition around it also disagreed with Surah 4:23, meaning it must have been revised too. And everything started rolling from there. We found out that these verses are crucial parts in making Muhammad the seal of the prophets. And based on that, we have deduced 9 specific predictions here, 3 of which we could be tested, and all 3 turned out to be correct. So in all 3 cases, we did find tampering with one of the oldest manuscripts, and it's not that there were signs of tampering throughout the manuscript. So the changes really occurred precisely in the predicted places. That means that our theory is validated as much as a theory on a historical issue can be validated. Because it's exactly in those places. It's not anywhere else. So it's not a random luck. It's not, there are 100 changes in this manuscript, and 3 of them happen to be the ones we figured out, then we would have a problem. But because it's so precisely those, we can consider our theory validated. And remember that we also have solved the age-old problem of the word kalala, just in passing, which puzzled the early scholars to no end. But we're still not done, because with everything we found out so far, we can now accurately reconstruct what must have happened with our manuscript, which will also tie up one more loose end. So what we're likely looking at is a scenario in which an old Quran manuscript existed, which did not yet include the changes that we've been talking about, and which had to be replaced, either because it was missing those crucial bits, or because the manuscript fell apart, or for any other reason. So we have an old manuscript, it needs to be replaced, and this old manuscript did not have the changes yet that we talked about. So a scribe produced a copy which was supposed to contain the changes, confirming Muhammad's sonlessness and hence his status as the seal of the prophets. But luckily for us, the scribe made some mistakes which now reveal the truth. So first, in Surah 4:12, the scribe didn't pay attention and copied the word kala from his template, forgetting that after the changes, it was supposed to be kalala. But this was a minor error, and he could somewhat fix the issue by adding a second lam and redrawing the kaf. And then later a second editor came and made it even a bit nicer. But when copying the folio with the last verses of Surah 4, he forgot that he had to add in the new verse 176. He faithfully copied the old manuscript line by line, and only then did he realize that he made a mistake and that he had to remove the entire page, because he now had a problem. He was following the layout of the template, and were he to just write as normal while adding in a long verse like verse 176, he would need more than one folio to do so, which would mess up his entire approach. He wanted to go, have exactly the same layout as the template. So he had to make sure that the folio he was working on ended with the same word as the template he was copying. So in order to achieve that, or as we said, he removed the page and then he continued on the next one, and he crammed in as much as he could on folio 20R in order to make up for the space he would need on 20V. The scribe had to add the new verse, but he did not want to change the number of verses. So he merged verses 173 and 174 according to the Syrian verse ending system. And unlike everywhere else, he did not leave room for the verse separators, again, because he merged them, thereby keeping Surah 4 at 175 verses as it used to be. But only later was the separator introduced. And because of the lack of space, it had to be represented by 4 vertical dots, which now also explains this strange verse separator. Now, once our scribe had added the first 6 lines on folio 20V, it was time to add the new verse 176. The scribe probably knew that he would need exactly 6 lines for this new verse. After the disaster with the first attempt, he must have practiced it on like a scrap piece of paper or something. So he knew he would need 6 lines. And then he saw that if he continued like he did at the top of the page, like writing into the margins, he would not be able to fill the page if he because he would like the content of the page would come to an end before the page itself. So at that point, he increased the margin and the spacing again, and added the new verse, and then followed the template so that the page ended with the same word as did the old manuscript. Now, what is the consequence of all of this? It means that in conclusion, we can say that Surah 3340, which contains one of the 4 only mentions of the word Muhammad in the Quran, and the only one that clearly refers to the Prophet of Islam, was not originally part of the Quran. And now I have one more summary here, summarizing everything we've just gone through. So Muhammad's biography was written in order to provide context for the Quran. After the original context, which was the Bible and the Apocrypha, were lost, many passages appeared to be nonsensical and required a new explanation, which was then based on the life of Muhammad. He was like the new canvas on which to paint this. During a later editing process, the Seerah itself influenced the contents of the Quran. Solidifying the dogma was one reason why the Seerah was used to revise the Quran. And one such dogma was the belief that Muhammad was the last prophet. And source analysis strongly indicates that several verses were inserted or changed in order to make Muhammad the seal of the prophets. And scribal errors inside the Codex Parisino-Petropolitanus verify this theory. Okay, and that's it.
Let me do this. Listen, the implications, yeah. I'm gonna leave it as I'm gonna say the implications, because what has just been dropped. Hiroshima, Nagasaki doesn't even come close. This is bombs. I wish I had sound effects on here. I really do wish I had sound effects. Don DeMarco, everything. Hey, listen, Thomas. There you go. There you go. Since nobody else is doing it, there you go.
Cheers.
Wow. So you know what? Okay. And I'm so grateful that we have such an eclectic community. Okay. And I'm just pleased. My naysayers. Yeah. Naysayers, if you're in the comment section right now, you already know. Hit us up. Okay. At Titans TV or super chat us. But you know what I'm going to do? Because sometimes you guys are shy until I actually, post the link. Listen, I'm going to tell you this from now. I am not here for a long time, but I'm here for a real good time. Okay? So if you want to come on and challenge what the brother has to say, come on in. Do your best. Oh, yeah, you've heard the information. If you think you can challenge what he has to say, please don't come onto the show and embarrass yourself because you saw the level of scholarship, right? But if you believe you could challenge what he just stated, yeah, defend the community, defend the ummah. Come on, defend the ummah now. Defend them. If you can't, just humbly sit back and say, you know what, I learned a thing or two. I'm actually gonna have to go back, do some research, speak to my sheikhs, my imams, my, whatever you want to call them. Yeah, go back, speak to them, do what you have to do. And if you want to congratulate the brother, come on in as well, and let the brother know how good he did. Okay, I'm just seeing some claps right now, so let me just show those claps. Yeah, I'm showing those claps. Let me see. Okay, woo, sugar. We got Tamari El Habashi, sorry, up in the building with us as well. Let me just keep you out. I'm gonna get to you soon. Just don't worry. I'm just gonna keep you out of the live stream until a little bit later. So hang tight. Another 5 minutes. Yeah. Anybody else would like to come on in? Yeah, I'm gonna give everybody the time to come on in. Right. This is just the. I'm just doing this to kind of make sure you are ready for this. Okay, Carbonet, the aunt, my queen right there. Like, share, and subscribe, baby. Come on. Let's do this. Let's do this. So anybody else in the comment section? You don't want to say anything? I know sometimes during the shows, you guys are usually running your mouth. Today, you guys seem pretty quiet. Pretty quiet. Okay, let me just recap this. You're telling me that the one and only place within inside of the whole Quran of the 114 chapters, yeah, the one place that it mentions Muhammad in a historical context is actually an interpolation and wasn't really a part of the original Quran. Is that what you're saying to me?
Exactly.
Ooh, ooh, ooh. I've got questions now because if something as big as that could creep into the Quran, I want to know how many other interpolations are in the Quran.
The thing is, in this case, we were really lucky that the scribe made so many mistakes. So that's why we were able to identify this interpolation. Other cases, so far, it hasn't been that easy, but there are other methods, as I've shown, like there's textual analysis. So there are scholars out there who do their best in identifying interpolations. But yeah, it's a difficult task here. We were really lucky to have this old manuscript with so many mistakes in them, which reveal the truth.
So this is the same type of science and methodologies that biblical scholars, biblical criticism, textual analysis actually use as well. Would I be fair in saying that?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
So that's how it was developed. So originally it was, I think, like 18th century, 19th century, around the time when it was Christians trying to interpret the Bible using the Bible, and they developed all those tools. And it has evolved since, but it's hardly ever been applied to the Quran. So that's something new, more or less.
Okay. Again, family. Listen, I don't even know, I don't even know because I don't even want to ruffle too many feathers, but this is powerful. And it seems as though you're keeping quiet on this information so far. All right, we've got somebody else that's new as well. I'm going to start bringing people in now, okay? So we've got Casey and Tamari that's here with us. I'm actually going to bring you in first, Tamari. Let me mute my mic. Go ahead.
Peace be to all who may be watching this, and peace be to you, brother Kalam and Thomas Alexander. Thanks for letting me in. So I see how it's kind of reviewed with in the area of scholarship, where people are questioning the authenticity of Quranic manuscripts and the scribal changes that may be there or not. Still in the idea of it being manuscripts, because manuscripts might not be original what was there at the time of alleged revelation or real revelation, according to who believes and who doesn't, who has faith in it. But these would still be considered manuscripts. And when people look at the manuscripts, they see that the dottings aren't there and the ahruf aren't there as well. But they see the writing there. They still see a script. And when you see that script there, it is some language that's being written down. You'd say it's Arabic language. But the question then becomes, what Arabic language is it? My people are from Ethiopia and they go back to Arabia. If someone asked me something about the Ethiopian language, I have to tell them that there were many languages in Ethiopia. So in Arabia, how many languages may have existed would matter when someone's trying to translate what this is saying, what these writings are saying. And now, if you look at it from the mainstream perspective that there is a Qurayshi dialect of Arabic, then you'd have to speak that Qurayshi dialect of Arabic to be able to translate it in that perspective of what you believe that to be. So my question is for the brother Thomas Alexander is, do you speak Arabic?
I myself don't. I'm relying on this. Like, I'm looking at what scholars write who do speak Arabic, obviously, and I'm compiling it. So I'm not the scholar who came up with this. I'm referring to, in this case, David Powers, Gabriel Zaid Reynolds, and others. Who do speak, and I'm just bringing it to a wider audience who otherwise wouldn't be aware of it, what's going on here.
No problem, no problem. Thank you for explaining that. So you don't speak Arabic. So
No.
okay. So one thing that has to be taken into account in scholarship of Arabic, the language, is that it's not a language that fell out of the sky, because languages develop.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
now some people are writing about how Arabic that is in the Quran may have a relation to ancient Syriac that was being spoken at that time,
Yeah.
because some will often claim that Syriac is was the lingua franca of that
Yeah.
region of Arabia at that time. But there
Yeah.
also has to be another thing looked at concerning Arabia and that Hijazi region and the Arabian Peninsula, is that there was actually Arabic being spoken at that time, and Arabic is an ancient language that goes back hundreds of years. In fact, it is one of the oldest so-called, Semitic languages that people would say, and it is one of the oldest written languages with a script, and its script has been found in many different countries, from Saudi to Yemen, all the way up north to Syria and down to Ethiopia and Eritrea.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. The thing is, yeah, there's clearly Syriac words in the Quran. A lot of them actually. There's Syriac is the most, like, other than Arabic, Syriac is like the most prominent language in the Quran. And also, yeah, you're absolutely right. There are other Arabic dialects, languages, scripts as well, and that's actually also a very interesting thing, because the Arabic scripts that did exist in the very south of the Arabian Peninsula, which are also related now to Ethiopia, the Ethiopian languages, that wasn't used for the Quran. It was actually the script that's used in the Quran is actually relatively young. It's not attested to much before the Quran. I think the earliest attestation is somewhere in the 5th century, maybe AD. I would have to check this out. Maybe the 4th century, but really quite young actually.
no problem. Could I share my screen and share some? I'd like to share something of those scripts that need to be looked at concerning Arabic, the Arabic scripts.
Yeah, you're free to share your screen. Just gonna let you guys know. Listen, family, as I said, I'm not here for a long time. Okay, I'm trying to close down the show very soon. So this is your opportunity to come on live on Titans TV to ask your questions, make a comment. Okay, all right. We've got people on here. They've got busy schedules. We're not gonna keep them here for too long. So come on in, family tree. Come on in. Okay. All right. Let's
All
see.
right.
Go ahead.
So is my screen being shared right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're looking at is known as a comparative chart of ancient Arabian scripts, because Arabic is an ancient language. And what people are used to hearing and seeing is maybe this column of Arabic, the Alif, Ba, Jim, Dal, Dal. And our brother Thomas Alexander here has said that he doesn't read or speak Arabic. And which would be crucial in knowing what the Quran is saying if it's written in Arabic. and even modern Arabic is a living language. But aside from that, what would the people of Arabia at that time be speaking? Now,
Depends on what you mean by Arabia.
it does depend on what you mean by Arabia. Well, this chart, being a comparative chart of ancient Arabian scripts, refers to 4 different scripts that all fit under the Sabian category, Sabian being the language of the people of Sheba, which consists of ancient Eritrea, Ethiopia, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and many other countries, allegedly. But these 3 right here aren't so much spoken of, although in modern scholarship they're still referred to as Arabic scripts, and they are children of the same script. Mind you, if I wrote my ABC right here without a not in cursive, you might see that handwriting and think I'm writing a whole completely different language. And it'll take some archaeological evidence to prove what any of this is talking about, what any like script somebody comes by is talking about. So this language or script right here, Safaedic, the Safaedic script, is actually found as far north as Syria, and a Thamudic script is found in Saudi. Now, Syria and Saudi are not too close to each other, and you find the Sabian script in Ethiopia, which is even further south than that. Now, if all of these scripts have been found in ancient times and are still there to this day, and many of these inscriptions that they find on these stones and rocks go untranslated, mind you, for the Safaedic and the Thamudic, they talk of over 15,000 different inscriptions untranslated of the Sabian dialects and scripts of Arabic, untranslated inscriptions. Don't you think it would matter if people were to research what the Quran is saying and what language is the Quran? As the brother just referenced, there being Syriac words in the Quran, maybe it is that there are Arabic words in the Quran because Arabic is an ancient language. But see, scholars may not know of these languages. There, not many scholars may know of these languages because there's a lot of wars being fought in places like Yemen and between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. There's a lot of people don't even have access. If you wanted to see Sabian inscriptions,
tomorrow, let me cut your wisdom real quickly because I don't have too much time left on the
okay,
show.
could I just end it quick with 1 minute of what I'm saying, maybe?
Chai. Okay, round up.
Got you. Well, there's inscriptions even in places like Ethiopia, northern Tigray region, where there's a war being fought, and they got the Saba inscription, and they say that there's mentions of Hebrew people on those inscriptions, and there's a lot of important inscriptions to be looked at that speak as to what the Arabic language is and as a precursor to the modern Arabic that exists today. So if I can't finish this what I'm sharing, I'll just leave everybody with that in order to ask questions when a scholar comes on here and shares his information, that we look at it objectively, and these may be his views, and put him up to question. Thank you for having me on and being able to come and share what I got to share. Peace, brother. And peace be to you, Thomas Alexander.
Thank you. One comment on this: there are actually scholars looking at this who do analyze those scripts and languages. So now, while the language itself is relatively similar throughout, or was relatively similar throughout Arabia, the script definitely isn't. And the Arabic script as it is today seems to not be derived from those Sabaic or scripts that you just shown. So there is scholarship out there, which if you're interested, I could share a link, for instance, or maybe I think I have YouTube open somewhere, so maybe I can post a link.
I just personally shared that because I'm myself from a Black Arabian descendant of the Prophet Muhammad myself. uh, my family comes from Warrahimano. If you search up Haile Selassie, his wife is
Yeah.
from our clan, Warrahimano. Ahlul Bayt, if you ever hear about the Shia, for example, there's a cousin of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam named Ali ibn Abu Talib, and his descendants are all throughout Africa. So there's plenty of us, and we know our history and stuff. And some of us are learning Ge'ez and Arabic, and the some of those traditions have continued on. So you know.
All right, let me just say, everybody who's still here, if you have enjoyed the show, okay, I'm gonna ask you guys to please take a little trip over to Thomas Alexander's channel, yeah, and just just nicely, just quickly, just tap, caress, smooth over the subscription button, okay. Just give it a little something, something, okay, and keep up with all the information that he's putting forward. I wanted to know, actually, did you want to share a link before I ask you this question?
Me.
Yeah.
I've put a link in the chat.
Okay, in the chat section. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. I'm gonna post it. I think it's gonna be in the private section. Let me see. Nope. Okay. All right. Cool. So yeah, I wanted to know, like, before we close down the show, what's going on? What's coming up on your channel? I've seen that you've been doing the Dome of the Rock. I saw Mel put up something on Jay Smith's channel. Is this a direct rebuttal? See, I'm causing a drama now. You know what I mean? Is this a direct rebuttal to Mel? Do you not agree with what Mel is saying, or does it go a little bit deeper?
So in this case, I think it will be a direct rebuttal. Yeah. So what Mel was presenting was the latest paper by A.J. Diaz, who claims that the Dome of the Rock was much later than we think it was. So typically, right, the inscription says 691 as construction date. He's arguing it was much later, and that it was rebuilt several times over, and that the inscriptions are all late forgeries. And I've looked at his evidence and I found it to be lacking. And now I'm posting over the next week. I'll post my rebuttal videos, if you will.
Jeez, I can't wait. I can't wait. Okay, so all right, I'm. It's been a pleasure having you on Titans TV on Talk with the Titans.
Thank you.
I'm trying to
Pleasure
get.
to be here.
I'm trying to get a commitment from you. I'm trying to get a quick commitment live on air to say, yeah, I'm gonna come back on Titans TV. I quite enjoyed myself.
Absolutely. So, happy to come back.
Hey, lovely. Because if you guys haven't already hit the subscribe button, I'm gonna make sure that if I catch something that is gonna be very tantalizing and to you guys' taste buds, I'm gonna make sure he comes on and presents some information. I'm even going to try my very best also. Okay. Sneakily, before he even puts out on his channel, I'm trying to steal his content and make it on and put it onto my channel first. You know what way is there. So yeah, man, I'm gonna try to get some exclusives from him. Please, yeah, show your love, show your support. Go like up his channel, as well as I would like for you guys to show some support as well. If you've enjoyed the content so far, make sure you take a trip as well over to his Patreon page and become a member, and you get to also have early access to all of his new videos as well if you become a Patreon member. Okay, all right, family tree. It's been a pleasure, it's been a blast, and I am going to be closing down the show. Thomas, if you have any last words, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks again for inviting me. And whenever I got something good, I'll definitely be back.
Hopefully, let me, in the words of my good Muslim brothers and sisters, inshallah, my brothers shall be back. All right, family tree, peace and love, and we out. young Cali, baby. Oh man.